welcome to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And Luis, you want to hold up your book? We're going to tell the listeners that they're going to be in for a treat today. There you go. Hold the book up. The other side. There we go. We're going to be talking about ordinary resilience, rethinking how effective leaders adapt and thrive. Luis Velazquez, and hopefully I said that right. If I didn't, I apologize. But Luis is joining us from where this morning?
I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, so Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley. Well, that is, for all of my listeners, you can go to valascoaching.com. That's VALASCOACHING.com to learn more about Luis. But the book is fantastic. I'm going to tell them a bit about you. He's an entrepreneur. He's a fitness enthusiast. He's the co-founder of Peninsula Fitness Ventures, currently a leading CrossFit gym in San Carlos, California. He's a recovering scientist. He was the visiting professor of fungal genetics at Michigan State University and a postdoctoral fellow in plant genomics at Rice University. Born and raised in Guatemala, Central America. As a younger man, he had a brain tumor survival and average endurance athlete. He's competed in over 100 marathons and ultra marathons, some in the 100-mile range, and 9 Ironman triathlons. He is currently, as we said, we're talking about his book. The book is now out. He and his wife and their children, Alexis and Nathan, live in Redwood City. And when not coaching or spending time with his family, you can find him on the trail running or facilitating one of the most ionic classics at Stanford University Grad School of Business, Interpersonal Dynamics, also known as Touchy-Feely. He is also the contributor to HBR Ascent and the Chief Learning Officer magazine. Well, you've got quite a bio, my friend, and you are definitely a very active gentleman. And I think that history with your brain tumor and you getting involved in an athlete made you extremely resilient. We're going to be talking about resilience today. And, in the book, you describe ordinary resilience as more than more than the book, but it's a transformational guide for leaders, is what you say. So that's what this book is designed. So every leader out there today, I want you to realize that he's written a book that will help you transform. So what key experiences in your life, we mentioned a few of them, obviously the brain tumor and the triathlons and the 100-mile runs, which are incredible to do, inspired you to create the framework for this book and for resilience?
Greg, I think that the key here is, that thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate it. Yes, so I got a brain tumor. I came to the United States as a young man, no English at all on the scholarship. I went to school. I learned so many things in order to get what I wanted to do with little resources, let's put it that way. And back in the day when I was growing up in Guatemala, my dad was a truck driver. He had a horrible accident. We were really poor, I grew up really poor. And when he came back from the surgery, when he came back, he was disabled. He said to himself, and he said to us, I am gonna build my own business. I am going to do this. I am gonna send you to the university and buy a house. And my mom and I were thinking, how are you gonna do that? You couldn't do it when you were healthy. So when I was undergoing my own experience as a brain tumor survivor, when I went through the brain tumor, and I had that experience from my dad that served me as some sort of level of inspiration. But here is what happened is that over time, people will tell me, "Oh my God, you're so strong. How do you do it? Oh my God, you're so strong. How do you do it?" So this book started as a journal to understand the experience of my dad and myself. That even though we went through really hard times, we came on the other side much, much, much better than we went into. Not despite of the difficulties, but because of the difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the story of the book, and I didn't connect it to resilience. To me it was like, what is it that we did? What is it that I did that allow us to overcome this situation? And it wasn't until I read the book by Adam Grant and Sheryl Sandberg, Plan B, that book is talking about the not resilience in the terms of survivable, but resilience in the terms of thriving and adapting and then thriving. It's like how people actually not only just bounce back but get better as a result of the situations that they went through. And I said to myself, that's what happens to me. This is it. So that's when I made the connection.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's like anything in life. People just use the gym as an example. You're an athlete, so you can relate to this. The more weights you lift and the more reps you lift, the stronger you can become. And it's been proven that, whether it's running or it's weightlifting or it's cycling, it's any of those events, I'm an avid cyclist, so I know the more miles you can put in, the better you can get. And so the reality is, how does this shift in perspective that you and your father took? Your father did actually move here. He helped you get an education. He grew that business. How does that shift in perspective help leaders who are out there today listening navigate adversity more effectively? Because, we see this Six Sigma and we see all these things where people are lean and they're trying to run these businesses, and yet they're dealing with so many complexities that they feel an overwhelm. And many people don't feel resilient. They feel like really beat up and burnt out. What would you tell them about the beat up and burnt out that could help them change?
Well, so I think that, if we go back to a few thousand years ago, when we used to live in caves, even when we were walking in our forests, we are the most resilient species in the world. We are here because we're resilient. The fact that you're sitting there and the fact that everybody is doing about their business, if you ask them, can you describe some issues that you had in the past that you survived, and you thought that you were not going to make it? Everybody has a story. So we already have resilience ingrained within us. The key here is that how do we unlock that resilience, and that is the purpose of the book.
What is the foundation? You call it the foundation of resilience, and you outline the core elements that form a foundation of resilience. And I think this is important, right? Because the leaders listening, anybody listening, can begin to identify their own resilience gaps, as you call it, and work on strengthening them. What would you tell them about looking at resilience gaps in the core foundation of resilience?
So let's just start from the premise. And the premise is that, you're already resilient. You already have everything that you need to take the first step.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. That's number one. The base, the key here is that you embrace your own awesomeness and your own resilient self that lives within you. So now, the things that I have found, with my dad and with myself, but also with the coaches with the people that I coach and the research that I've done, is that there are 5 things that we need to do. And number one is to embrace the challenge, is to accept where we are. You see what I'm saying? But as a temporary component. So if you are in a situation that you don't like, you need to accept that. They say, yes, this is where I am, but this is not where I want to stay for 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. You see what I'm saying? And I think that is a lot of times the issue with many people is that they feel that they don't have a choice, that where they are is where It's a place of endurance.
Well, in the book, you call that embracing the suck, right?
Absolutely.
It's the first pillar. So if somebody is in that spot right now, how can they train themselves to not just accept that challenge, but actively seek to grow to, out of it, right? Because it's one thing to be there, right? Accept where you are. I get that. And the other thing you say in the book is that one of the points is optimism is a key driver, right? And I think people find it difficult, Luis, to find optimism when they're depressed and they're down and they're in those situations. Like you had a brain tumor, you went through it, but you had to rise above it. What do you think were the key things for you and your dad rising above all that?
I think that for me and for my dad and the people that I coach is to make a commitment to get better. It's to make a commitment to do something else. It's to make a commitment to get out of the situation that you're in. And I use commitment because commitment has an emotional attachment to it. It's not a decision. Decision is in the head. Commitment is like it involves your head, but also involves your heart. I'm gonna make a commitment to get out of this situation. So that's number one. Now when you think about that, sometimes making a commitment to get out of the situation where we are doesn't show where do we want to go, and that's where the optimism comes in. Like that my goal. I call in the book. I call it my aspirational goal, my moonshot. My moonshot. Like for me, for instance, I can tell you, when I was in the darkest time of my life, I actually was contemplating suicide, and then all of a sudden, an image appeared in my head, and it was the image of my mother. And I realized I cannot do this to her. If I do this to her, she will suffer for the rest of her life. So I made a commitment. I need to get better. But here is the thing. I wasn't doing it just for myself. I was doing it for my mom too, to avoid that pain. And I think that a lot of times, we feel that we need to do this for ourselves. And that is a lot of times when we need to realize that we need to have some purpose and significance as a way to motivate ourselves to go through the pain that we have to go through, because there is a purpose and a significance on what we're trying to do.
So, Luis, how did your running and athletics, like you did 100-mile events, you did triathlons, you were an avid athlete in that respect. That, what I have found as somebody who's a cyclist, it always brings me out of states of depression as a result of the releases of the chemical reactions of the endorphins and oxytocins and all the rest of it. Did you use or team up with those events as a way for you to get through the pain? And if you did you find it to be one of the best ways you could work yourself out of the pain?
My wife tells me, go exercise because you're a better husband when you're tired.
Right. She's
It's
right.
true. And I think that resilience has several components, and one of them is emotional resilience. Physical resilience is one. And what does happen with the physical resilience is it completely changes your chemistry. What you said earlier, you get some level of hormones that makes you happy and makes you much more fulfilled and makes you feeling that you're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
So now, how did I do that? I didn't do it because of that. What I tried to do was to get better. As I mentioned, when I made a commitment, I need to get better. And for me, getting better was getting my health back. So what I needed to do is, I needed to start, exercising and running to get better my health. And what happened is that I started getting better at it. And that is the component of resilience, is that resilience is about the small changes and the small progress that you make that will lead you to big results. So when I started doing it, I can barely, run, like 5K. I never thought that I was going to run 100-mile races. But as I get better, I can push myself more and more and more. And that is the key with, with a lot of, people that, they put things, I want to lose 10 pounds, and when you lose the 10 pounds, I'm done. That's not right. You need to keep moving forward in order to get better at what you are we trying to do.
Well, I think there's a lot of theories out there that if you're not in discomfort, you're not actually growing. You got to have some level of discomfort. Now, obviously, running a 100-mile event, you're in plenty of discomfort. Even finishing a 105-mile bike ride, there's plenty of discomfort along the way. And I want to ask this question around facing fears. Before people start a lot of this, there's a lot of fear. A fear, oh, I can't ride 100 miles. Oh, I can't run 100 miles. Oh, I can't run 26 miles, right? And that's one kind of fear. But there's also fears that we're faced with every day in business, right? It's like, hey, are we going to have enough money? Can we make the payroll? Are we going to be able to do this? You talked about your dad being a truck driver. How can leaders differentiate between the fears that protect them and the fears that hold them back from taking the necessary risks like you have, right? They need to differentiate. They need to understand what is the difference between a fear that goes, oh no, I'm not going to make that investment because I'm afraid of losing my money, versus, oh, I'm going to make the investment because I have now pulled myself out of that fear and I see that this is a good way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that there is, unfortunately, a lot of the fears that are holding us, the most prominent fears are the ones that hold us back. The stories that we make in ourselves about ourselves and about others. So that put apart. The other type of fear that you mentioned is, should I make that investment? Should I not? Yeah, I think that fear is granted, but the key here is two things. Is like, I never wanted to be fearless, because fearless sometimes becomes careless. But I wanted to fear less. You said I wanted to fear less, and the only way to fear less is if you make a small contribution to displace the fear and get some courage to move forward, or ask about from other people. What do you think about this? Should I do it? Should I not do it? Because the more information you get, the more you will be able to make a sound decision. So that's for the fears that that hurt us. But the other type of fear that you mentioned about the idea of the living ahead. I mean, the best thing to do that is to start thinking about, is this a fear that I have that lives in my head, or is this something real? And if you challenge that, then I guarantee you that you will come to the conclusion that this is a fear that I have in my head. I need to move forward with this.
But I like what you're saying.
Challenge that fear.
Yeah, and I think one of the authors that I interviewed some time ago was a woman by the name of Byron Katie. You may not know her or not, but she always would tell people to ask questions. Is it real? Is it really real? Or is it really true? Right? Because we make stories up, then we begin to believe them, and then we live out the story that we made up. That, in essence, it's making shit up. That's what happens. We do that.
Yeah.
We do it a lot. Now, look, you've got these 5 pillars. One of the pillars is finding your inner strength. And you've been talking about it a bit, finding your inner strength. But in asking leaders to look inward, how can leaders discover and rely on personal values during times of extreme external pressure? Because I think when you have your values defined and what you stand for, it can make a huge difference about you either crumbling or not crumbling under a lot of pressure. Yeah. What would you want to say to that?
Well, I think that a lot of times, going back to where I was, the darkest moments of my journey, I was equating my identity with what I used to do. I was a professor, I was married to a beautiful woman, I had a house, all of those things. So that was my identity. The minute those things disappear, my self-worth went down the drain. Until I decided, I started thinking about, who am I? Who is Luis? And then I realized there are three things that are defining me. I am persistent, I am committed, and I'm optimistic. And those three things can be applicable to anywhere. I can use those three things in anywhere. So how that translates to leaders, and one day I was talking to a particular leader, and then he was so tied to his startup, but the product that he was producing. So he was, like, oh my gosh, like, if this fails, I fail. And then I said, no, who are you? And we came to the conclusion, several conversations, like, he said, I'm an entrepreneur. I said, great. So if you're an entrepreneur, that should not be tied to the product that you're selling. You're an entrepreneur, and you can be an entrepreneur by selling this, selling next, selling whatever you gotta do.
Right,
So I'm saying,
right.
So I think that the key here is about embracing your values, but also your identity, and apply that where you are today.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. And you mentioned a lot of points about resilience here, building resilience, finding your values. And you have these 5 pillars. Do you believe that leaders tend to overlook the most, and which one is it and why? And how can they ensure they are strengthening each pillar equally for a more balanced approach to resilience?
The most is relationship building. The reality is that we spend a lot of time solving problems when we should be mimicking solutions. Because whatever situation you're in, whatever challenge you have, I guarantee you that you look in your closest or among your closest friends, you will find someone that has gone through something similar or already solved that problem. And we don't do that enough. You see what I'm saying? We don't do that enough. Even I'm saying we don't do that because
Why do you think, Luis, that people miss that one? It seems so obvious that I think you were looking for the old word Rolodex, but anymore it's CRM, our database where we have all these names on our phone, our contact list, to actually just pick up the phone and dial it and talk to somebody about your issue, somebody that you love and respect, you care, a fellow leader, another person, another family member. Why is it that you think people have to go it alone?
I think that there are a couple of things, but the one thing most that I have seen the most is the fear of shame. It's like, oh my God, if that I am having this problem, that they feel, oh my gosh, they feel that they might think that I'm not doing enough, or I am dummy, or whatever the stories people have in their head. Is the fear of shame is the one.
They're embarrassed.
And I think that, there are three things there is one thing that people don't want to do is they want to lose face. And that is the fear of losing face and asking for help is what a lot of times, deter us from actually picking up the phone and be courageous enough to admit that you don't know everything.
It also helps you build resilience. Think about it. I mean, the reality is you learn from other people. My show's been on the air 17 years, helping people build resilience, right? It's been helping them learn about their own personal growth. And, you provide several real-world examples of leaders who have successfully implemented resilience strategies in the book. And I think it's great that you did do that because it gives people an idea. Can you share one of the most impactful stories from the book and what key lessons leaders can take from it?
So there were several in there.
There's a lot.
There's a lot there, but let me think about which one will be the most impactful. I was coaching this particular leader, and then she, this particular individual was overwhelmed, and she felt that she had no choice on the matter, that she was burnout. It was incredible the amount of work that she was under. And as we were start talking, the realization came to her that what she was doing is that she had trouble saying no to people. Not to people. So that's number one. And at the same time, we were talking, and I said, I think that what you need to do is to find a place where you can recharge, because you need to have some emotional time, and your emotional tank and your positivity type has to be full in order for you to keep going in this situation that you're in. And she decided, you know what, I am going to form a group of I know 4 other, people in the organization that are going through the same thing that I am going through. And so she formed a small coaching circle to help each other to come out, to deal with the same things that we're dealing. You will think that she was already overwhelmed, yet she took on something else. But what happened to that is that completely recharged her, then, because there was an emotional component to that, and she felt that she was actually having an impact on people that allowed her to not only do the things that she was planning to do for herself with others, but then use that as a small space to practice the things that she needed to do outside of that group.
So it's like it's a self-nurturing and care. I mean, look, we all talk about this. The question is, what do we do? And I know people say, well, for you, it might be running. That's part of your self-nurturing and care. For other people, it might be yoga. Maybe it's meditation. Maybe it's a walk along the beach. It's a ride on their bicycle. But the reality is she formed a group. Maybe it's a group meeting, and we all sit around and talk about our issues so we can help one another. I think there's so many ways where you said relationship, because people forget to reach out and speak with somebody who they care about and who cares about them. I also know that from sales and marketing, and this is an old statement, but I've said this many times, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right? And that is such a true statement even today. I mean, it was Zig Ziglar who came up with it, but the reality is it's so true. If you care, others will care. And if you're compassionate, others will be compassionate. And regardless, you need to be compassionate to yourself first and then to others, because then you can go on. And you end the book with implementation strategies. What advice do you have for business struggling to put these tactics into action effectively? It doesn't matter if I'm a company like Adobe with Teams or Microsoft or Google. I've got all these people working in here. And from a resilience standpoint, we have to help make more resilient leaders. What advice would you give them to kind of implement these strategies? I think that the number one thing that any leader can actually do to help a team is to model the way. Model the way. That's number one. Number two is to provide a space where people can experiment. And what I mean by that is a lot of times, the amount of people that I have talked to that they're afraid of making mistakes and fail. And that is against, resilience, because resilience is about experimenting and trying new things. And then at work, they cannot do that because they're so afraid of failing. So those two things, I think that will be the most amazing thing that people can do for their teams, is modeling the way and allowing people to experiment, and I help them to make better decisions. That's great. I think being a good model and a good role model is always an important thing. And it also means that you have to change if you want others to change. I know that I've talked on this show many times, and most recently there's been all these topics about time and meetings and how much time is wasted in meetings and so on. And the CEO of Pfizer was telling people, look, you don't have to go to those meetings because we're spending way too much time in meetings. And then what was happening is these meetings kept going on. They were happening and blah, blah, blah. And then somebody said, well, I've told you guys you don't have to. And then somebody said to him, but look, you're the one that's creating all those meetings, so we're still coming. You weren't the role model. In other words, you didn't stop going to the meetings, so we didn't stop going to the meetings. So the thing is it's really simple stuff like that, right, Luis, that people have to get. And whether it's a meeting or whether it's how you organize the team or how you get along in the team, as long as you're a good role model, as long as you're open, as long as you have good communication, as long as you're compassionate, as long as there's inclusion and understanding, and you taught all this in the university so you get this, you're like the number one. I'm speaking to the choir here. But in the conclusion to your book, you invite the readers to rethink traditional notations of leadership. Okay. What do you hope is the most significant mindset shift? And I'm going to underline mindset shift that the readers experience after engaging with your book, Ordinary Resilience.
I think that, the biggest thing that I hope that people realize that is that there are more options than that we think of. There is only one. So a lot of times, we think of the world in black and white. A lot of leaders believe that their way is the only way. A lot of leaders believe that they have reached certain level of power or influence, and they stop learning, and now they rely on what they learned before, when the reality is that we live in a world that is constantly changing, and it is impossible to know everything. So I think that what I wanted people to see in the book is that in order for us to act differently, we need to think differently. And in order to think differently, we need to see differently. And what I hope that the book can do is to challenge the way they see things so they can think differently and they can act differently for themselves and for the team.
What I would say is that I hope after this podcast interview, most of you realize that you're looking through the front windshield of the car, not in the mirror for the rear of the car, right? So that you're looking forward. I remember Rita McGrath talking about connecting the dots. And I know how important it is as a leader to be able to look at all these nuances and be able to connect the dots to try and, I won't say predict the future, but at least have some idea of maybe what the future might hold in store. Because the more you do that, the more you use the tools that are available. I know there was just a special that Oprah did around AI and, how this is going to change the world. And Bill Gates came on, and the guy that started ChatGPT came on from Silicon Valley, and he said his name was Adam, I think. Is that right? You probably know him better than I do. And he was really interesting, and I watched him answer the question that she asked. And one of the questions is, well, do you think, because this is a typical question about how fast we're moving, that the world is changing and people are afraid of AI? Afraid. And I was thinking, why would you be afraid? I get that it's a new technology, but if you go back in history, people were afraid of electricity when it came out too, right? And the reality is we've had lots of inventions that all I would tell people here today is I hope that Luis actually got you to think about not being so fearful and about looking out the front of the window of the car, not the rear, to see what's coming behind you. And for you to keep moving forward, because resilience is really about taking a next step forward. And Luis, you're a shining example, and your dad of continuing, and mom, to take a next step, coming here and immigrating from Guatemala, you with your brain tumor, your dad with the bad truck accident, making a new world for you guys. You're a great example, and I really, really appreciate you being on the show. Any final words?
I thank you. I appreciate you for having me. My wish is for people to see that we all have the ability to get better, that we don't know everything that we should know. We can't, it's impossible. But we need to rely on each other and ask for feedback and ask for advice in order to move forward. And I think that the minute we start thinking about, being so committed to get better, then we'll try to find ways of actually finding the data that we need for ourselves to get better. And we need others to know ourselves. That's what I was trying to get, that we need others to know ourselves.
Well, I think most important is I kind of look at the way we form relationships, like you mentioned earlier, relationships. There's a tapestry, it's a tapestry of life. And when somebody weaves something all together, and you get to see all these weave points, like a person weaving a blanket, and all of those threads, and you look at the threads in your life and how they've moved through and how many people have influenced you positively through the course of your life, it's way more than the people who've influenced you negatively. And so I really want to thank you, Luis, for being on Inside Personal Growth. Namaste to you. You want to hold the book back up over to the right over here. There we go. It's called Ordinary Resilience, Rethinking How Effective Leaders Adapt and Thrive. And you're going to go to the website, which is VALSCOACHING.com, Luis Coaching. And there you can learn about him. You can work with Luis. He's got coaching services, more about the book, the blog, the team. Again, definitely check out his website, join his newsletter to learn more. He is an exceptional leader himself and an exceptional author and someone that you should get to know. Luis, thanks for being on Inside Personal Growth.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate you having me. It's an honor.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.